Here we go again. Watch Dogs is a troubled Ubisoft franchise, but upon reflection the first one hit the spot for me. A hacking thriller in game form, it allows the player to live out the fantasy of spying on people, you know, just in case your neighbours are plotting against you, while also giving us a taste of the lifestyle of a dark, gritty vigilante like Aiden Pearce. Watch Dogs gives us a fully digitally connected Chicago, packed to the brim with information and weaknesses that we can exploit. Its core identity of hacking transforms the game from a generic modern open-world third-person shooter into something that explores a genuinely interesting concept. It's far from the perfect game, but when it behaves itself, which isn't a given, it can be an awful lot of fun. Following my video on this game a few days ago, I wanted to make another video about it. I floated the notion of Watch Dogs 2, but it didn't quite appeal to me in the same way. And then it dawned on me the first Watch Dogs had an expansion that I simply never bothered to play. And thus I decided to rectify that by doing a video on the Watch Dogs DLC I never played, Bad Blood. And nobody could prepare me for the Aiden Pearce baking tutorial.
Preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. With a wooden spoon, mix your butter into the mashed bananas. Use a large mixing bowl. Next, mix in the sugar, egg, and vanilla. Lightly sprinkle in your baking soda. Mix vigorously. Add your flour and mix. Pour your mix into a buttered loaf-shaped pan. Bake for 50 minutes. Cool for 10 minutes. Remember the most important step. Enjoy.
What the fuck? In Watch Dogs Bad Blood, we play as T-Bone Grady, aka Raymond Kenny. The guy the exposition at the beginning of the main game was talking about, you know, the man who committed an act of domestic terror and killed innocent people. I'm sure he'll be an absolute blast. He's had a hard life. Raymond as a playable character differs from Aiden Pearce in one key respect. Instead of a tactical baton, he has a massive fucking spanner. And he wields it violently, inflicting blunt force trauma wherever he goes. He also has a taser, but that's insult to injury. Raymond Kenny is still dealing with the fallout of helping create CTOS, and of course the blackout he caused in 2003 that wound up killing 11 innocent people. Following the events of the main game, after some time, Kenny decides, you know what, f*** Chicago, it's shit, I'm leaving. And then he proceeds to not do that. Because on a technical level, Ubisoft hadn't designed anywhere for him to leave and go to. But from the perspective of narrative, it's because he has plot to do in the meantime. Plots such as rescuing his former colleague Tobias Frewer from Fixers. He's had a hard life too. Realising that if the Fixers could find Frewer, they'd likely find him too, T-Bone embarks on a mission to erase the possibility of that happening. How? More hacking. And of course killing. It helps him ease his conscience after the people he killed. Along the way, Raymond finds himself tying up various loose ends in Chicago, aiding a Chicago PD detective named Sheila Billings as she embarks on a mission to invoke a gang war, and T-Bone doesn't even question why she's cooperating with him. He also investigates a DedSec murder mystery regarding the leadership, the Council of Daves. It appears they get about in public wearing sacks on their heads. It's a genuinely interesting bit of side content that feeds us little snippets of information about how DedSec actually operates. And we learn how Clara Leal and Default knew each other. We also have the Fox Hunt, in which we tie up some loose ends on behalf of Aiden Pearce. It's here where we discover his fondness for baking banana bread, and also stop Bloom from tracking him down. And we also discover somebody who was murdered because they cosplayed as him.
Fool kid got himself killed playing dress up. God damn it.
I'm sorry, kid? He's 50! Anyway, it's interesting to see Bloom display some competence, and though they never really feel like an actual threat to the protagonist, even here, it's good to see it's implied they could be. Nobody questions the pixelated man outside on CCTV though, and though Aiden Pearce isn't present in this expansion outside some phone calls, we get a light bit of further insight into his character regardless, and take down the bounty hunters known as the Rosario brothers. So in very small respects, the DLC added to the lore of the Watch Dogs universe, and I can always respect that. Back to the plot of this expansion, it's nothing special, but I've already mentioned how T-Bone is still dealing with the blackout he caused in 2003 that wound up killing 11 people. Well, considering how the main story of Watch Dogs is Aiden Pearce on a revenge mission, it's a cool dynamic to have the expansion's protagonist on the receiving end of somebody else's vendetta. Whose? Default's. Hang on, isn't he the guy I flattened with my motor vehicle? How's he alive? Well, as it turns out, his physical appearance in the main game is that of a body double. And that explains why he doesn't speak, and he does in the expansion. Not that I'd refer to his voice as anything short of irritating.
In the months after your crime, each one of these families found a lump of cash in their savings. Was that you? Did you try to buy your redemption?
I tried to make it right.
Oh, you'll make it right, Ray. That's a promise.
The story initially portrays Default as just another hacker, an antagonist, but not necessarily the main one. But then we learn his brother died during the blackout that Raymond caused. He was being looked after in a mental health facility, then the power went out and he went for a wander. And you can figure out the rest. Right, tangent time. I just realised in the first Watch Dogs, the map features no hospitals. Not that it's necessarily hard to figure out why they didn't feature any hospitals in the first game. I mean, come on, it's too tempting. Anyway, Default reveals himself to be the main antagonist of the DLC after we learn what happened to his brother, and in a very menacing way attempts to use Raymond's guilt against him. And it's good because it actually makes Default interesting, which is something he just wasn't in the main game, and it also transforms the premise of the plot from tying up loose ends in Chicago to escaping the vengeful wrath of the Rat. And it also forces T-Bone to face up to his guilt in a way, because the only way out is through Default, who, albeit only for a short bit, weaponizes Raymond Kenny's conscience, culminating in him facing the loved ones of those whose deaths he caused, who had been brought into Default's plans and could now vote on Raymond's fate. Raymond appeals to these people by explaining that they don't deserve to live with the same guilt that he has, which gets through to a few of these people but not enough to save him, and so Default gasses the chamber he's now inside. However, before dying, T-Bone manages to hack in and redirect the gas into the chamber where Default is, killing him instead, concluding the story of Watch Dogs Bad Blood. And then T-Bone decides to stay in Chicago and, with the help of Tobias Frewer, hopefully find a way to put right the wrongs they put into effect when they helped create CTOS. And then in the credits scene he necks a beer and scrans a burger. So how does the main protagonist, T-Bone Grady, aka Raymond Kenny, differ from Aiden Pearce? Aiden is an inflexible personality on a revenge mission. His revenge mission isn't for the sake of it, but rather simply to regain control. Highly intelligent and hard as nails, he's able to mould his personality to whatever the situation demands of him. But it's really difficult to gauge his actual character traits outside the fact that he has a gravelly voice and deeply mourns the loss of his niece. He's a well enough written character, but it's incredibly difficult to actually gauge him. T-Bone, on the other hand, deals with his guilt by masking it with a distinctive, easygoing, laid-back sort of manner. And though capable in combat chiefly for gameplay convenience, his main trait is his high intelligence. He's far less imposing than Aiden Pearce, and so he puts other characters at ease, making him a much more sympathetic character by default. His life's mission since 2003 has been to make up for the damage he caused when he caused the blackout that killed 11 innocents. An event that explained to have only been him attempting to show the people what one operating system running an entire area can do, and how such a thing could be exploited, and he never meant for people to die. And the plot of this DLC story does not absolve him of the guilt he feels, but he does come to realise he may never be redeemed in the eyes of those he's wronged, and the best he can do is try to do some good. And that's an easy choice, because innately he's a good man. Is he a better protagonist than Aiden Pearce? I think it's hard to gauge the differences when you only get 10 missions with T-Bone and you get an entire main game storyline with Aiden. But playing as T-Bone by design, it feels as if there are more authentic dimensions to his character. His psychology isn't meant to be a mystery within itself, and that's the main obstacle between the player and connecting with Aiden Pearce's character by comparison. You're not meant to know the mind of this man, not properly. You know the broad strokes of what and why, but who Aiden Pearce actually is a puzzle within itself, and that's simply not an obstacle you need to worry about when playing as Raymond Kenny. One thing that does harm the plot of Bad Blood a lot, though, is the dissonance between the story and the gameplay. Raymond Kenny feels guilty over the deaths of 11 people in 2003. However, over the course of this DLC alone, he kills far more people than that, more overtly too. You could argue these people aren't innocent though, but some of them are simple Bloom employees just doing their jobs. You could go the stealthy, less lethal route if you wanted to and only rely on melee weapons. but it's a coin toss as to whether or not somebody gets tased or battered on the head with a massive spanner, which is likely to do catastrophic damage. It is intended to be a non-lethal weapon like the tactical baton, but it's still wryly amusing that catastrophic brain injuries don't exist in storytelling. It's not a big deal, as most games have a disconnect between the themes of the story and a lot of the gameplay in a lot of respects, and Watch Dogs Bad Blood is hardly the worst offender. But the theme of being guilty over causing deaths, when still causing deaths, can make it seem a bit hollow, even if every killing you carry out in Watch Dogs Bad Blood is arguably far more justified. Away from that, talking about gameplay, well, it's Watch Dogs. You've got your standard fluid third-person shooter with stealth elements, and the hacking in this game is still a cool layer to that. As far as new mechanics are concerned, it's quite light in that respect. However, there are missions where you need to use an RC car to remote control your way past things, and it makes the occasional mission stand out here and there. It's also nice this thing has some light combat abilities, and it's also good the game doesn't rely on using it in every single mission.
Bam!
Beyond that though, you're just playing more Watch Dogs, and that's kind of all the expansion needed to provide. It is a bit underwhelming for the most part. T-Bone's movements are identical to those of Aiden Pearce, and that only really differs when using the spanner melee weapon, which is a tad slower than the tactical baton. For the convenience of gameplay, everything else is more or less the same as the base game. You have skills like in the base game, and there are some new ones in there, including the street sweep tree, unlocked specifically by partaking in side missions. I also noticed most of T-Bone's cosmetics are locked behind an online related currency, something I promptly ignored, and I'm now officially running out of things to say. So I'll wrap up by saying it was worth eventually playing Watch Dogs Bad Blood. It allowed us to explore one of the game's more interesting characters in more depth, as well as the fallout from one of the Watch Dogs universe's most important unseen moments. It has some cool side content, and a nice light sprinkling of novel mechanics, and the plot is carried largely by the interactions between T-Bone and Tobias Frewer, and default the most depthless antagonist from the main game actually gets some depth here. It also makes a nice joke at the expense of Aiden Pearce, and now I'll never get the words mix vigorously out of my head again.
Mix vigorously.
So ultimately I enjoyed my time with Watch Dogs Bad Blood, but all it truly served to do was be another excuse to play some more Watch Dogs and hunt down the biggest creature in Chicago via the means of the profiler. You never know what questionable individuals you might find out there. Thank you for watching more nonsense from me. I'll see you soon.